Okay, good evening, everybody. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We have a quick agenda update. We'll go ahead and add Rachel Sills to talk about Winnebago County, the Winnebago Courts and Illinois Supreme Court language access policy in favor of it. And she'll be speaking here momentarily. And with that, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Mr. Biondo. Present. Mr. Booker. Mr. Boomer. Here. Mrs. Crosby. Here. Mr. Fellers.
Here.
Mr. Fiducia.
Here.
Mr. Gurl.
Here.
Mrs. Gurl.
Present.
Mr. Hoffman.
Present.
Mr. Jury.
Present.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Mr. McDonald.
Present.
Mr. Nicolosi.
Here.
Mrs. Red.
Present.
Mr. Salgado.
Present.
Mr. Schultz. Mr. Tassoni.
Present.
Mr. Webster.
Here.
Mr. Westcott.
Present.
Mr. Wilson.
Present.
18 present, 2 absent.
Okay, we will have a very short closed session at the end of the evening, and with that, we will ask everyone to stand for invocation and prayer. Mr. Westcott.
I was waiting for that. God of all creation, we come before you to give you honor and praise. You are the source of all that is good. You are the source of all of our blessings. Thank you for every gift that we have been given. We thank you for the opportunity to come together this day. We ask for your hand of blessing on this meeting. We ask that you would guide and direct our meeting so that it is full of wisdom, productivity, and above all, respect for one another. Thank you for helping us to accomplish our work and our goals. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Westcott. Yes, Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. I would like this time to just have a moment of silence for an individual that passed on this last week. He was known as Mr. Ice Cream Man in Hells Park. But more importantly, I had the opportunity to serve with him on the Winnebago County Board. He was an excellent steward of the public, and his name was John Elliott. So just a moment of silence in his remembrance, please.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. We'll have a moment of silence for Mr. Elliott.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. So our next item of business would be public participation. Is Rachel here? Oh, come on up, Rachel. I'll read our little disclaimer as we always do. Comments shall be limited to 3 minutes. Speakers may not address zoning matters which are pending before the ZBA, zoning committee, or the county board. Personnel matters or pending or threatened litigation may not be addressed in open session. An individual may speak a maximum of 3 times per calendar year on the same topic. This prohibition shall include the repetition of the same topic in a statement of what is purported to be a different topic. Personal attacks or inappropriate language of any sort will not be tolerated. Thank you very much for being here, Rachel. You're up.
Thank you for having me here. So I have 3 questions that I would like to pose to the board. Number 1 is Winnebago County Court using court interpreters according to the Illinois Supreme Court language access policy. 2 is Winnebago County being reimbursed properly by the state of Illinois for the use of interpreters. And 3 are judges mandating the use of court interpreters correctly according to the Supreme Court policy for all mandated procedures. First, what does the Supreme Court say? So the legal proceeding means any court proceeding, including criminal or civil proceedings, as well as proceedings such as mediation or mandatory arbitration, but also probation contacts and court-ordered evaluations, which may include medical or psychiatric evaluations. Who should be appointed and hired for the above matters? The Illinois Supreme Court policy provides that, and I quote, whenever a foreign language interpreter is appointed by the court, a certified interpreter shall be provided if one is available. After the court has made reasonable efforts to provide a certified interpreter and one is not available, a registered interpreter shall be provided if one is available, end quote. In summary, you hire a non-certified or non-registered interpreter, unqualified interpreter, only if the court made reasonable efforts to hire a certified or registered interpreter and none was found. A list of certified and registered interpreters who have passed the 5 translation and interpreting exams through the Illinois state. That list is found on the Illinois court website, and also local interpreters on this list can make themselves available to the courts. And as for money, interpreters who are certified, the state of Illinois reimburses 100% of their fees for their services. For interpreters who are only registered, the state of Illinois reimburses fees of up to $30 an hour. And interpreters who are neither certified nor registered, it is the county that pays for all fees charged by the interpreter, and therefore nothing is reimbursed. Finally, as this policy extends to civil matters as well, our judges ordering the use of certified or registered interpreters for all on the record testimony, whether in court or in depositions, and are they ordering the use of certified or registered interpreters for all court-ordered evaluations that arise from litigation. And in summary, is the County of Winnebago taking on unnecessary expenditures for interpreter services by providing unqualified interpreters, and is it complying with policy by mandating court interpreters for all Supreme Court mandated services?
Thank you very much for your time, ma'am. Appreciate it. Our next item of business. Mrs. Gorel.
Thank you, Chairman. Is there any way we can get a copy of what she just related to us? I only understood, I think, the first part of it, and I would really like to have a copy of that so I could read it over. And I bet there's other people, other council people in here that would also like to have copies of that, so we would have it for reference.
Let's see what we can do. Absolutely. Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Next item of business would be the approval of the minutes. May I please have a motion to approve the minutes for May 24th, 2018, and to lay over the minutes from June 14th, 2018. I got a motion by Mr. Jury. May I have a second on the minutes? Mr. Girl, thank you for the second. Any discussion on the minutes before the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Announcements and communications, Clerk McCall.
The items listed below were received as correspondence.
And we will place those on file. Thank you very much, Clerk McCall. Appreciate it. Next item of business, board member correspondence. Under board member correspondence, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one announcement, and it pertains to the Booker Fest, July 13th through the 15th, from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. Friday will be the Youth Shark Tank. Saturday, Wakanda Dance Challenging. Sunday, Soulful Sunday. It's free to attend. There will be foods and that out there for the people that are hungry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Any other comments by board members? Seeing none, we'll move on to Chairman's report. Thank you, sir. So a couple basic updates. At the end of August, somewhere around the end of August, we will be getting back from Mission Critical the 911 consultant report, where they're looking at the potential options and future long-term strategy of 911. Just want you to know that's in the hopper. The other thing we've talked about several times is that Baker Tilly has been doing an HR and finance assessment over the last several weeks. They will have their report, and I believe that will be ready for some board discussion sometime in August as well, probably late August. So those are a couple of things that will be coming in the near future. With that, I'll move on to the County Administrator's report. Carla.
You all have this handout at your desk, but I've been asked a lot about in particular, the inmate revenue that the sheriff receives for housing federal inmates, and that it's not being attributed to the sheriff's department. So I kind of wanted to show you how we track these items within our accounting software. The first page is a summary of all the revenue and expenditures related to the jail in both the general fund and the public safety sales tax fund. And supporting that are our munis reports. If you look at the first string of the account numbers, you'll see the number 21,000. And what we do is, this is what we refer to as an org code. It's a department type code. And for every revenue and expenditure that's directly attributable to a department, we use that code so that we can track the individual revenues and expenditures of each department. And then I did the same thing for the sheriff's budget and the 911 budget. You'll see that in each of these departments, the revenue does not support all the expenditures, which is not uncommon for a governmental service that's provided to constituents. Then we have revenues that are not attributable to an individual department, such as property taxes, sales taxes, replacement tax, and that's what's used to support the deficit in each of these departments. So before we started the budget process, I just kind of wanted to make that clear. That comes up a lot. And so does that kind of explain how we're tracking those revenues and attributing those to the sheriff? Anybody have any questions? Okay. As far as the budget, we've completed all our review of the budgets with the department heads and the elected officials for the general and public safety sales tax funds. So right now we're projecting out our revenue streams in those funds and finalizing the recommendations that'll come out of county administration. And then as part of the budget, I've asked Ann Johns, our purchasing director, to review all the printers and copiers that are located in each of the departments. Our plan is to eliminate all of the printers that sit on individuals' desks, because even though the cost of those printers may be low, we're finding that the toner costs are kind of outrageous. For instance, my printer, we got free by turning back in toner cartridges to the office supply company that we work with. So my printer was free, but when I go to buy toner, it's a couple $100. So I think we can improve our copiers within each department, have everybody print to the copier and save quite a bit of money. So I'm having Ann do that evaluation right now. Mr. Jury?
Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. I agree with what you just said about printers. However, if memory, I recall, we just spent thousands of dollars when Sally was here buying new printers. I hope we're not going to go out and sign another contract and buy additional brand new printers. I hope we use the ones we have and get rid of the desktops.
What she's doing is taking printers that have low numbers of copies on them and putting them in different departments, and then only replacing the ones in departments that have very high usage. And the copiers that at the end of the 5-year lease are those copiers with a really high number of copies are pretty useless. But anything that we're taking out of service, then she'll have an auction to sell.
Okay, as long as we're not, spending.
She's doing a really good job of evaluating where we can relocate things.
Thank you, and as long as I've got the floor. In finance, I should ask probably Mr. Bianco and you, is the finance committee going to have a chance to interview each department head and elected official? Is that
Yes.
Is that on the forecast somewhere?
It's in the budget calendar. We'll be scheduling those
Thank you.
once we present you the first draft.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment. Carla, what you just gave us about purchasing is a good example of lean principles. And that maybe something you might think about. Thanks.
We're trying. And then just a quick update on River Bluff. I've gotten some reporting from them on staffing. Our staffing's remained stable, which I'm pleased with because there's always high turnover in our CNAs. But they've been working so hard that we've actually remained stable. We do have, in certain shifts, like the overnight shift, we have a little bit of a shortage, but they continue to make efforts to increase our staffing there. And this has resulted, we've looked at our agency staffing, and in 1 month it's gone down $8,000. So if we can continue that trend, we're on the right track. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Biondo.
Yes, I just wanted to address the negative numbers that are in here. When the revenues and expenditures for the jail, there's this, I guess in the first one, it's the jail from the general fund is a negative 1.456.
Yes.
And then for our public safety sales tax, it's 7.699.
Yes, and then a total for the two funds of a deficit of 9.155764. But then those are supplemented with property taxes, sales tax, replacement tax.
And so to get to the actual amount of deficit.
Oh, I don't have that. I was just demonstrating, how we track the revenue for individual departments. I also made a note on here that this only includes the expenditures that are paid out of the general fund and public safety sales tax fund. We have separate funds to pay payroll taxes, IMRF, major capital outlay items like the records management system that we're looking at now, building maintenance, and debt service on the jail is not included in here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. And then if I could go to Julia, just for a quick, I think everyone has one of these, right, Julia? So if you just want to take a quick minute and explain to the board what this draft is.
Sure, thank you. I just wanted to share an example of the initial version of transparency reports that we're working on for administrative departments. This is a work in progress. I'm looking for feedback. If there are suggestions that you have on metrics that would be helpful to you in your decision making, please share that information. And if you'd like to view the other departments that we have reports started for, please visit the website that's listed at the top of the sheet.
Thank you, and I believe what will be happening in the end of the third quarter, which is the end of July, is there'll be an update. This will be tweaked, I'm sure, for the different departments, again, which is online, but then there'll be a narrative or at least a highlight update from department heads as well as maybe a preview of what's coming up, and that'll just be part of the department snapshot, so to speak. I did see a hand up, Mrs. Wren.
Thank you, Chairman. Julia, is there any way you can give us a breakdown of these full-time employees, the makeup?
This wouldn't
It should be on this.
This particular report will focus more on operational level detail, like what's going on in animal services. That, I think what you're talking about in terms of the demographic breakdown would be more of an HR-focused discussion, which of course could happen in operations committee.
I would like that, please.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Jury.
Thank you. I would like to remind Mr. Dorothy that I've asked that question of HR to formulate a report for the last 10 years of minority hiring, and that's coming. That'll give us kind of an overview of what went on.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs.
One more comment.
Excuse me 1 second. Thank you very much, Mr. Jury. I'll go back to Mrs. Red. Mrs. Red.
Thank you, Chairman. Gary, when we say minority hiring, I would like to, all women are considered minorities. So I would like to know the people of color, if that's possible. That's what I'd like to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions by board members? Seeing none, we'll move on to our next item of business. Thank you very much, Carla and Julia, for your updates. Appreciate that. And our next item of business would be the consent agenda. May I please have a motion to approve the consent agenda, which would include the raffle report and the bills. I have a motion by Mr. Jury, a second by Mr. Westcott. Any discussion by board members on the item before the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Consent agenda approved. Next item of business, Finance Committee. Mr. Biondo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first item that we have on the Finance Committee is a resolution authorizing settlement of a claim against the County of Winnebago entitled David Jacobson versus Winnebago County. It was a settlement of $10,006.30. Basically, when they first came in, it was for $17,000 to $20,000 and some life coverage, and they got it down to this amount, and we approved it 7-0 in the Finance Committee. So I'd like to move that we approve that resolution.
We have a motion by Mr. Biondo on item B, the settlement of the claim against the county entitled David Jacobson versus Winnebago County. I have a second by Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Burl. Any discussion by board members on item B under the Finance Committee? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Biondo.
Yes, we then have a resolution for authorizing an IMRF Form 633 out-of-state credit authorization for Troy E. Zellman. And the committee discussed it, and the IMRF out-of-state service would be a way for them to buy credit, and we would then have to pay that. And it was disapproved by the committee 0-7. So I'd like to, I don't know how to do this, make a motion to approve, I guess. But
With your permission, Mr. Biondo, I'll suggest, and then you can decide to make a motion to approve. We'll get it on the floor, and then we can do what we need to do. Would it be okay with you if we did a motion to approve both items?
yes, it would be, because they're identical. It's just two different people for out-of-state credit.
Okay.
And one of the things is, you know, I guess the personnel people in 18 years have never done one of these, and that was one of the arguments that they used too. It just, you know, hasn't been done here. So it was, like I said, 0-7.
Okay, so I'll take that as a motion from Mr. Biondo to approve, motion to bring it forward on items C and D. May I have a second? I have a second by Mr. Webster and Mr. Wilson. So now the item is before the board. The two items are C and D, Zellman and McWhirter. Any questions? I think Mr. Biondo overviewed it, that it was not recommended by administration. It failed on a committee, unanimously failed on a
Right.
committee.
7-0.
Would it be appropriate, I think maybe to have Carla just give a 30-second overview on what this means, because I don't want people to be unclear on what they're saying yes or no to. Carla?
It's for employees that have previous out-of-state service. They would be required, the employee is required to pay an upfront specified cost. However, our cost would be built into our actuarial valuation, so we can't tell you exactly what the cost would be, but whatever service they are credited for, then we'd be responsible for whatever was needed to be paid in order for them to derive the benefit they're entitled to at the end of their service.
So if I could follow that up, and then I'll go to Mr. Fellers. If the board would say no here, what happens to the individuals? What would happen to their out-of-state IMRF then?
It wouldn't fold into IMRF.
Okay. Mr. Fellers?
Just so I'm clear, this is essentially they're trying to roll over their other pension fund.
From another state.
From another state into our pension fund.
Correct.
And there would be a cost to us.
Right,
For
because,
rolling it over. We'd be responsible for whatever those credits were from that rollover.
right.
Thank you.
Am I correct in assuming that one of the concerns is that it's a little, we're not exactly sure how that would play out over time, Carla?
Correct, because it would just build into the actuary evaluation, and there's a lot of assumptions. You know, what their length of service would be, what we'd earn on our investments, what the projected benefits would be.
And this is very this is not something that we've seen a whole bunch of. Is that correct as well?
I don't think it's ever been brought to the board, so I don't know what past practice has been, but.
Okay, thank you, Carla. Mr. Jury.
You've answered my questions, Carla. I'm not going to support this because you can't project me how much money it's going to cost. So it's a no-brainer to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. Oh, Mrs. Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. I believe, and I might be wrong, but when these people retire, can they go back to that old state and draw their money from that state?
It would depend if they were vested or not. You know,
Are
like
they vested? I believe one of them had 10 years.
I don't know for sure.
If they're vested, 10 years, they would get paid from that.
What did these people have? I think it was mentioned.
It's an out-of-state pension, yes.
We'll follow up, Mr. Webster.
Thank you. I think it's pretty darn clear that we've never gone down this road before. We don't know what the eventual outcome would be on it there, what it would cost the taxpayers. And so there's no way in the world I would support this. I recommend denying this. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Any other questions by board members? And again, we have two resolutions that are on the floor before the board, C and D. Mr. Feller's on a follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one more question. Did we reach out to any of the other counties just to ask how they've approached these in the past? Or are there reciprocal agreements where they honor these requests from former Winnebago County employees, other counties honor those requests as well?
Well, if you're part of the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, it doesn't matter who your
I
employer
was thinking
is.
more Wisconsin, I mean, we're close to Wisconsin.
Yeah, no, we didn't.
Okay.
We're very close to
These are Florida and Tennessee is where the two are from.
Florida and Tennessee. Mr. Kelly on a follow-up.
And I was just looking at our agenda packet, and the form is in the agenda packet, and the length of their service in another state is 2 and 3 years respectively. So I doubt if they were vested.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Any other questions or comments by board members on items C and D? A yes vote would be to approve the two resolutions. As you know, a no vote would be to deny the request. So with that, we will go ahead and all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I will ask Clerk McCall to do a roll call vote, please. And again, this is for both items C and D.
Mrs. Ray? Mr. Biondo?
No.
Mr. Boomer?
No.
Mrs. Crosby?
No.
Mr. Fellers?
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia?
No.
Mr. Girl?
No.
Mrs. Gorham?
No.
Mr. Hoffman?
No.
Mr. Jury?
No.
Mr. Kelly?
No.
Mr. McDonald?
No.
Mr. Nicolosi?
Nope.
Mr. Salgado?
No.
Mr. Tassoni?
Oh, no.
Mr. Webster?
No.
Mr. Webscott?
No.
Mr. Wilson?
No.
17 no, 1 yes, 2 absent.
Thank you very much, Clerk McCall. Motion fails. We will go on to our next item of business. Mr. Biondo.
That concludes our report.
Thank you, sir. Next item of business, Zoning Committee, Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Chairman. Zoning Committee has a number of items on our agenda here this evening, so stay with me on this, please. The first one is Z0618, it was a map amendment, and it was for one of the solar farms, Winnebago Solar Systems, and this was in County Board District 1. And the applicant has asked us to send this back down to the Zoning Board of Appeals for additional testimony. And so they put that in writing, and we agreed with them at zoning committee that we should do this. So I would move to suspend.
We have a motion to suspend. We've read in the item. We now have a motion to suspend the rules on the floor by Mr. Webster. May I have a second? I have a second by Mr. Fellers. And did I see another hand? Mrs. Gorel on the second. Item is now before the board, and the motion is to suspend the rules, which will allow us to vote this evening.
Information, this is on the sending it to ZBA.
Yeah, this is referring it back to the Zoning Board of Appeals. This came out of our committee with unanimous approval to do so. So when we send this back to the Zoning Board of Appeals, it's up to us whether we want to send it back to the Zoning Board of Appeals or not. If we don't do that, then in essence you're killing this project in its entirety. And so because it came out with unanimous approval, I'm asking for us to send it back because it would get on the July 17th meeting.
So we have a motion, right now what is before the board is a motion to suspend the rules.
One.
For item 1, yes. For item 1, we have a motion and a second. The item before the board right now is to suspend the rules for item 1. Do we have that? Are we all clear on the floor, Mr. Webster? You just wanted to suspend the rules at this time?
Yes, sir. And when it goes down to Zoning Board of Appeals, it eventually comes right back up to us again.
So the item is before the board. Mr. Jury, let's, if I can, we'll only have one board member have the floor at a time. Mr. Jury.
I want to do this rather quickly, please. You know, we have rules that we've set up in this board, and we don't follow them. And we don't follow them, not necessarily to try to make mistakes or whatever. And I agree, Jim, that there's no opposition here. But I'm going to bring forth in my committee an overhaul of our rules of operation. We need to streamline and make it a little bit easier for zoning and other matters. So that will be coming to my committee. I will support this because it's no opposition. But let it be perfectly clear, we need to come up with rules of why do we even make them. We're changing rules constantly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. Mrs. Crosby.
I just want to be clear here. The motion is to send it back to the ZBA, correct?
That's what the request was from the applicant.
And that's the motion.
Well, right now, it's suspended.
Right, but I want, before I vote on that, I just want to... What's the motion on the...
The motion on the floor, just to clarify, is to merely suspend the rules, which then would allow us to take action if the board determines that we would suspend the rules this evening. If the board votes not to suspend the rules, and I think history has taught us, if one board member doesn't want to suspend the rules, this item would lay over to the next meeting. But if we vote to suspend the rules, the board could take further action as a step 2. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Chairman. Jim, you made a comment that if we didn't send this back, it kills it. I just don't understand what kills means and why send it back to ZBA.
If we, excuse me, if we don't let this go back to the Zoning Board of Appeals, it got laid over by the applicant already, the committee. They wanted to present some more information. So the applicant tried to let us hear some more information. We told them, between myself and staff, we cannot accept any more new information other than the testimony that came out of the Zoning Board of Appeals. So if he wants to clarify something that's on the record or offer some new information, then he has to go back to the Zoning Board of Appeals and start over again. And so that would, I probably shouldn't say it would kill it, but it would put it in limbo. So if we don't allow the guy and he's the applicant, and you gotta remember, the petitioners are essentially our customers. And so, I don't know, why would we deny a man's request to go back to the zoning board of appeals again? It would really, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. Now, if you want to lay this over, if you insist on laying this over, then I'll have the same discussion with you again the next time we meet, because it'll be on the agenda once again.
Follow up, Mr. Tassone.
Yeah, Chairman, well, I just, like, maybe killed wasn't maybe the proper terminology, but
Yeah.
is that because you're insinuating that this is going to fail?
No, absolutely not.
Oh, they just want to make some kind of changes, or?
Yes, the applicant, when you go to the zoning board of appeals, that's your time to plead your case. And after that, the testimony is done. The books are slammed on testimony after that, okay? So that's why we don't allow him to come and speak before us at the county board, because he might tell us something that wasn't heard at the zoning board of appeals. So the same way, once school's out, you can't, try to add something to it, same way as a court of law.
I just would be curious, what will be changed by sending it back to ZBA other than where we see it now?
What will be changed is the applicant will go back in again, and he'll say, whatever he's gonna say, it might be, and I forgot to tell you guys that the neighbors are okay with this project now, or I have the blessings of the township, or whatever, okay? That's what he's trying to allow himself another chance at this.
Would it be accurate, Mr. Webster, to say that they want it to go back to ZBA so they can amend or add more testimony?
Yeah, you could say add more, but it's actually he'll have to start once again at square one.
Gotcha.
The zoning board of appeals, but all the testimony, he could repeat what was in there the first time it was on the record, but I'm sure he wants to add to it, embellish it, whatever you want to say, to prove his case.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Any other follow-ups? I saw your hand up, Mrs. Gorel.
We all have to remember, which we forget sometimes, that we have to go according to the minutes of the ZBA. And many of us forget that that is like our Bible that we have to go by. If the gentleman wants to go back because he realizes he didn't give enough information in regards to his project, we need to give him that opportunity to do so. Because once those minutes come out, they can't be changed. And so how we interpret those minutes at our meeting is we really need all the information we can get. We need to send this back to ZBA, let the man go back and present his case and see if we can't go forward with this.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Thank you, Mr. Webster. Any other questions by board members on the motion to suspend the rules? Seeing none, all those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. The motion passes. We've suspended the rules. I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Webster.
Thank you. I move to approve Z0618.
We got a motion by Mr. Webster to approve, we have a motion to send back to the ZBA.
To approve the request, yes.
To approve the request to send Z0618 back to the ZBA this evening. We have a motion, we have a second. We have a second by Mrs. Gorel to send this back to the ZBA. Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor of sending this item back to the ZBA signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. We've sent item 1 back to the ZBA. Mr. Webster.
Okay, thank you. And that's it for that question about not following our rules. These are the rules we followed all along. Okay, number 2 is in for a read-in, Z0518. And number 3 is in for a read-in, Z0718. Number 4 is in for a read-in, Z0818. So those are all in for a first reading. They'll be laid over to our next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Webster.
All right, moving on to number 5. Number 5, Z0918. It's a map amendment to rezone plus minus 6.8 acres. And this is from Troy Speck for a property on Dearborn, South Beloit, District 4. Now this came to us with approval, unanimous approval from the zoning board Board of Appeals and the Zoning Committee. And once again, I would move to suspend on this.
We have a motion by Mr. Webster on item 5Z0918, since it was unanimously approved in both ZBA and Zoning Committee, to suspend the rules. Second by Mr. Boomer, Biondo, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Tassoni, and Mr. Kelly, and I think Mr. Hoffman even threw in there at the end, piled on. Item is before the board. We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? We've suspended the rules. Mr. Webster.
Thank you. I would move to approve then Z0918.
We got a motion by Mr. Webster to approve Z0918 this evening and a second by Mr. Wilson and Mrs. Gorel. Any discussion on item 5 before the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Webster.
Number 6 is in for first reading, and that is Z1018. That's also a map amendment.
Thank you.
Okay, number 7 is Z1118. That's a map amendment as well. That's in County Board District 1. That won unanimous approval from both Zoning Board of Appeals and from the Zoning Committee. So once again, I would move to suspend on that one as well.
We have a motion by Mr. Webster on item 7, Z1118, since it had unanimous support in ZBA and Zoning Committee, to suspend the rules. Mr. Hoffman and Mrs. Gorel on the second item is before the board, which is to suspend the rules or not. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of suspending the rules and voting this evening signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. We've suspended the rules. Mr. Webster.
Thank you. I'd move to approve Z1118.
Got a motion by Mr. Webster to approve Z1118. May I have a second, please? Mr. Wilson and Mrs. Gorel and Mr. Salgado. Thank you. Item 7 is before the board. Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Item 7 passes unanimously. Mr. Webster.
Okay, number 8 on your agenda, Z1218, is also in for first reading.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Moving on, this will be to voted on then. This is a resolution directing the Zoning Board of Appeals to conduct a public hearing on a certain Unified Development Ordinance amendment regarding retreat centers, and this comes to you with approval 6-0 from Zoning Committee, unanimous. So I would move.
We have a motion by Mr. Webster on item 9, and that's the resolution directing the Zoning Board of Appeals to conduct a public hearing. May I have a second? Mr. Fellers, Mr. Jury, Mrs. Gorel. Any discussion on this item that passed out of Zoning Committee unanimously? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Mr. Webster.
Okay. Number 10 is a resolution authorizing waiver of fees for the demolition of permits. And this comes to you with the unanimous approval of the Zoning Committee as well. And I would move to approve.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion by Mr. Webster to approve item 10, the resolution authorizing waiver of fees for demolition permits. We have a second by Mr. Jury and Mrs. Gorel and Mr. Salgado. Any discussion by board members on item 10? Yes, Mr. McDonald, then Mrs. Gorel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just curious, do we have a total amount that we've waived, the dollar amount?
Mr. Webster.
You know what? I'm going to refer to both Chris and perhaps maybe Todd from the Health Department, because this is a joint resolution that they've been working on. Because there's a dollar amount from both sides.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Gentlemen?
Again, Todd Marshall, Director of Environmental Health. For us, this month, the Board of Health did pass a resolution for waiving our fees, and basically what our fees would come out is about $135 per property. So we're thinking about $1,350, and what that entails is a site verification for $60 that we waive, and that's determining if there's well and septics on that property and locating them. And the also would be a well sealing permit, and that is $75, adding up to $135 times 10, $1,350.
Thank you. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For building side of things, the fee schedule is based on the number of structures that would be torn down on the site. For the 10 proposed structures that they listed, it'll range a little bit based on the number of structures on the parcel, but overall for the 10, we're looking at probably $1,000 of demo permit costs.
So we have about 1,000 from the health department, about 1,000 from planning and development, a couple $1,000 commitment. Mrs. Gorel?
Would our board members like to know why we're asking for this to be done? Remember, we had passed that from our funds that we would tear down so many homes. And with our host fee, that we would tear down so many homes. What we're doing is charging ourselves. So why are we paying ourselves? That's why we're asking for you to say, to pass over this, because we don't want to pay ourselves. And that's what it's all about.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Any other follow-ups? Mr. Jury?
Thank you, Chairman Haney. Chris and Todd, there's so many homes that need to be torn down in this community. I would like you to furnish the county board members a list of the ones that we're tearing down, so we know where we're tearing these homes down.
It's on the packet.
Okay.
But obviously for $100,000, we're estimating it might be about $10,000 per home. So we're looking at about 10 homes. And as the health department, we are the people that actually went out to rank these homes, and we ranked them in several categories: the severity of the damage, how long it's been condemned, the location of it, if it's on a major artery through a neighborhood or school area. Also, if it was on wetland septic, that could do some kind of environmental impact, and that's how we ranked them. And we then split it up by percentage of the district.
Thank you. I would still like an email of which ones are being torn down.
Definitely, Mr. Jury.
Thank you.
We'll get that email out to you, Mr. Jury. I'm sorry, somebody had their hand up. Mr. Tassoni?
Thank you, Chairman. And Todd, while you're there at the mic, have these already been bid out for demolition, or if they haven't, is it a package of 10, or are they bid individually?
Actually, we're still at the beginning procedures on this. Actually, we haven't even started the legal process through Fast Track. So that's why on your packets, we did pick the top 10 rankings, but obviously we have to have some houses that are substitute, because obviously somebody might fight it in court and we might have to substitute one of those 10. So we're not to that point yet, but we'll definitely bid them out by the 10, yes, once we do. Yeah, at one time to get the lowest bid, yes.
Good question. Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Any other follow-ups, Mr. McDonald?
Thank you. Just one other thing. The first time this came up, I'd asked, vacant homes are terrific training structures for police and firefighters. If you could please notify the authority having jurisdiction for that area. I know as firefighters, we don't burn them down. We learn to do searches. We learn to cut holes in roofs. There's a lot of terrific training opportunities there. I'm sure local law enforcement could also enjoy a training opportunity such as that. So if you could please notify them wherever the houses are.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Any other follow-ups by board members? Questions? Yes, Mr. Webster.
Todd, is that packet you sent to us, is not that, you didn't send that one to everyone then?
Yeah, we sent it to everyone, yes.
We'll resend that piece of it out just so we can pinpoint that in a follow-up.
Definitely.
Thank you. The item before the board is item 10, the resolution authorizing waiver of fees for demolition permits. Any other questions on this item before the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Mr. Webster.
Okay, the last one is, number 11, is a resolution addressing certain concerns with regards to the solar farms, and we discussed that last night, but we didn't take any action on it, so it is to be laid over to our next committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster.
One thing I would add, though, is the ones that we did suspend to move forward, they involved the solar farm was one, and then the other one was a business. And so with us granting the okay, now they can move along a couple weeks sooner than they would have otherwise. So that's good news for
put some people to work. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Webster. Next item of business, Economic Development Committee. Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. We have no report.
Thank you, sir. And next item of business, Operations Administrative Committee, Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. We have several ordinances and resolutions before you this evening. And if it would please the board, I would like to take item B, C, E, and F at one vote. They were laid over. They've been discussed several times in committee. So if it would please the board, I move for their adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury to approve items B, C, E, and F. B is the ordinance on discrimination harassment. C is the ordinance on the presentation of budget amendments to the Finance Committee. E is the ordinance creating Section 2, or sections of Chapter 2, the Operations Officer. And of course, F is the creation of the Chief Strategic Initiatives Officer in the ordinance as well. So we have those multiple items and a motion B, C, E, and F by Mr. Jury. I have a second by Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Biondo. Any discussion on B, C, E, or F? Seeing none, are there any board members who are opposed to the motion to approve B, C, E, and F? Seeing none, we'll ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all 4 items. Thank you very much. Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. The next one, we have a resolution to redivide election precincts. And this was quite, there was a lot of discussion, but I move for its approval.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury on item D, the resolution to redivide election precincts. I have a second by Mr. Let's start here right to left. Mr. Westcott, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Nicolosi, Mrs. Red. Any other seconds? Seeing none, the item is before the board. We are talking about the resolution to redivide election precincts. Would it be okay to just get a 1-minute update on what we're doing on this? Because at committee there was discussion about what we didn't do in the past, what some thought maybe we would do in the future, but let's talk about what's right before the board that you're being asked to vote on this evening. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. My understanding, and I would turn to Carla or anybody that wants to jump in on this, that we took a total of 6 precincts. This is the county clerk's recommendation coming out of the county clerk's office. The one item on the one item from Jen Ray, her precinct, and there were the 5 other precincts in the November 2016 election that had 500 or 800 voters or more show up. Not whether or not they're registered, which is part of a statute discussion. What's before the board is to adopt those 6 redivided precincts, the Jen Ray precinct, and then the 5. Those were the 5 that exceeded 800 actual voters that showed up at particular precincts in November of 16, the big election, which is the presidential election.
And if I may add that something to that. In order to do all 70 precincts, the cost would be, well, right now we couldn't afford it. So, but it can be done another year, or when you guys, the new board, you can look into it and see if they need to be adjusted. But by the time you find a place to vote, election judges, we can't afford it. Thank you.
So any follow-up questions or comments? I have a couple of hands. I'll go to Mr. Gurl, then Mrs. Mr. Gurl, and then Mrs. Gurl.
Thank you, Chairman. If we could just put in here somewhere that we could direct the clerk in 2020 after the census, after the latest presidential, to look at these precincts and evaluate them at that time. Granting no legislation from Springfield arises that addresses this before 2020, but I think that would be the appropriate time after the census, redrawing, redistricting, remapping, that we look at this I think it would be a better way to spend our dollars more effectively, more efficiently than.
I agree, Mr. Grohl, but I don't know how we can do that, or if we can do that, we'd have to ask council, because if you understand, there's going to be an election, going to be a new county clerk, and I don't know if we can add an amendment onto that or not.
Mr. Kurlikus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We talked about this in our office today, and really trying to bind the board that exists in 2020 is really not doable. It's not appropriate. So, I want to remind everybody, this action in redistricting also always has to be done at a regular board meeting in June. That's why you're doing it tonight. Tonight's the last regular board meeting in June. So it will likely be redone when those precincts are redrawn anyway after that. So I would say it'll what you want to have happen, Mr. Grohl, will happen, but I think it would be overly cumbersome to add the amendment that you want to do here.
Thank you, Mr. Grohl. Thank you, Mr. Kurlikus. Mrs. Grohl.
This is the way I understood, thank you, this is the way I understood it too. It has to be done in June. And let's get these 5 out of our way, because this is what's on our back right now, and we need to get those cleaned up. From that point on, if you want to do it again next June, we can do it again. We can do it every June and slowly do it. We can then, if those of us who are here in 2020, we can bring it up again after the redistricting and see what has to be done. But right now, we're voting on the 5 that was our problem to begin with, that caused us to where the Republican Party wanted to sue us. So let's get that off our back, get it done. It's June, and then we can go on to it from here on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Grohl. Any other comments by board members? Seeing none, the item before the board is item D, the resolution to redivide election precincts. And since there's no other questions, all those in favor of item D signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. Items G and H, an ordinance amending sections of Chapter 2 of Winnebago County Code of Ordinance, creating consistency in actual daily procedures. That's in for a first reading.
Thank you, Mr. Jury.
Ordinance, then the next one, H, is an ordinance creating Section 62-26 of Chapter 62 of the Winnebago County Code of Ordinances for social media, and that is to be laid over also. That concludes our report. Thank you.
Just to follow up, Mr. Jury, one thing you did, I think, an effective job of at the last meeting when we had items to lay over is anybody that has questions, comments on the 2 that are laying over, feel free to reach out to Carla, Mr. Jury, on any questions on these 2 laid over items. Flush out any questions, get them answered for you.
Thank you. Just a brief moment, I'd like to wish all of my colleagues a very happy 4th of July, and look forward to seeing you after the 4th. Have a safe 4th of July. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. Next item of business, Public Works Committee, Mr. Kelly. No report. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Next item of business, Public Safety Committee, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Public Safety Committee has one ordinance to be read in for the first reading tonight, and that ordinance is ordinance Chapter 14 of the Winnebago County Code entitled Animal Control Ordinance, Winnebago County. What the ordinance is it provides that an administrator shall be defined as a veterinarian and licensed by the state. We want to change that to make it so the person doesn't have to be a veterinarian. I'd like to read that in for the first reading.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. Yes, Mr. Boomer. We have a motion by Mr. Boomer. May I have a second to suspend the rules? That would allow us to vote this evening. I got a second by Mr. Webster, and I believe I saw Mr. Tassoni's hand up as well. We have a motion and second to suspend the rules, which will allow us to vote this evening on item B under public safety. Any discussion by board members? And again, we're only suspending the rules at this point. Just so we're clear, I believe there's a state, this is not, there's nothing in the state statute that says we need to have this person be of that position. This is just allowing our county code to reflect what's not in the state statute, so that it aligns with state statute. Is that correct, Carla?
Right, you just need to have a veterinarian on staff to give medical advice, but the administrator does not have to be a veterinarian.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? The motion is to suspend the rules. All those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed, motion passes. We've suspended the rules. Mr. Fiducia.
Then I would like to bring forward ordinance amending Chapter 14 by the Winnebago County Code, and I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. Fiducia on item B on the Animal Service Administrator definition. We have a second. Mr. Tassoni on the second. Any discussion on this ordinance before the board? Seeing none, are there any opposed to this motion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Fiducia.
Speaking of animals, Animal Services had 1,163 calls for services. They took 156 dogs, 175 cats, 1 domestic rabbit, 3 parakeets, 1 rat, 2 bearded dragons, not to be confused with shaved dragons, and 97 wildlife. We've transferred 4 dogs to rescue and 63 cats to rescue. We've adopted out 39 dogs, 43 cats, 1 domestic rabbit, 2 guinea pigs, and the 3 parakeets found homes. That concludes our report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fiducia. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, like the rest of the board members, got a copy of this. This is good. It can be expanded to be lean-like, if you will. Like what caused the numbers to change, what was done, and show percentages, and it could be posted either on a tripod or right on the window, as I mentioned here.
Probably what I failed to mention when Julia gave the overview is this is being shared now as maybe a sample of what you might see from other departments. We want to get this to the board in a final form for Q3 at the end of July. But if you have thoughts on that, I would strongly encourage and actually help shape this. So please reach out to Julia and or Carla on that, just on your thoughts on what that might need to look like, things that are missing, things you might want to see. We want it to be useful to the board. If it's useful to the board, then it's going to be useful to the community so that everybody knows what's going on operationally in the county. So any thoughts, share those with Mr. Jury through operations as well. So it's a great point. I have a follow-up by Mrs. Gorel, then I have Mr. Jury.
Thank you. I don't have a follow-up on this. I just want to make a comment on the fact that on the 12 o'clock news on Channel 13, the Animal Services always has a pet of the day that they bring out there and show. It's good advertisement for us, and it's a good way to get rid of these animals. Thank you for whoever thought that idea up, and I believe it's free, I hope, that we're able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. This is just a brief thought. As you all know, the District 7, Olson Lake, is in my district. And I understand through Representative Cabell, we're having some problems with the health department. And I'd like somebody to call me and explain the situation. One day they go out there and they sample the lake, it's okay. The next day they come out, it's not. Are they doing it at the same time? Are they doing it after a storm? But the paper's been very vocal about opening that. It's an asset to our community. So I'd like Sandra to call me and give me a full report on what's going on.
Yes, Dr. Martell will absolutely be in touch with you. I'm sure she will. I would also suggest it may be a good overview in the ops committee because there's some context to it. This is a state-owned lake that has had a heck of a time getting back open. It's been a source of frustration for a lot of people for many months. And then more recently, when they got ready, then they did the E. coli test, which is administered by the health department, and the test actually failed. So then there was built up frustration, people were finally ready, and then there's the issue with the standard not being met, but I think that's a fair question.
Well, then it passed, and then it failed again, so I need some answers, and I appreciate it.
Absolutely, it's a fair question, and we'll get that information to you. On a follow-up, Mrs. Gorel.
Yes, you have to remember it's flowing water. So what flows in today, it goes out and new waters come in. So that's not uncommon for one day it to test positive and the next day for it to test negative. It happens.
And to your point, I think what will benefit the board is we'll get an overview of what the process is. That way everybody's on the same page. Mrs. Crosby, Government Affairs Strategic Planning. Mrs. Crosby, you have the floor.
Thank you. From the strategic planning perspective, we have sent out a strategic planning goal ranking survey, and of the 20 of us, 9 have responded, 11 have not. So it's a very easy survey. It didn't take me 10 minutes to complete it. It will, if you have to exit it midway, it will remember your answers. So it's a nice, slick program, so please take the time to fill it out. From a legislative point of view, we had sponsored legislation for precinct reform, elimination of assessment publications, and the sales ratio real estate tax reform. That is on the back burner. However, they are working on the elimination of assessment publications where the value has not changed. And they have sponsored precinct reform both through Stottleman and Severson on the Senate side and Sosnowski on the House side. And it's going back to committee, and it's going to come out as a new bill. We have successfully lobbied and the General Assembly to reduce the amount of local government distributive fund, and it's gone from 10% to 5%. That we've spent $1 million in 18, and it's going to cost us a savings of $500,000 in 19. We also lobbied to reduce the tax collection fee from 2% to 1.5%, and that will result in a significant savings. We drafted and introduced House Bill 5441, which is the assessment publication bill, relieving the assessor responsibility of publishing assessments when there's been no change in value. We successfully opposed House Bill 4581, which would have resulted in an age change from 18 to 21 for delinquent minors, which would result in a substantial increase in our expenses. They're working on initiatives for Rockford Gaming and the highway engineer to minimize the effect of small cell legislation. The real coup de grace, Chairman Haney was able to meet with the Senate President Cullerton, Minority Leader Durkin, Senate Majority Leader Claiborne, and 20 other legislators down in Springfield, and it was a very productive meeting. So we're moving forward, and that concludes my report.
The big thing, I think, looking ahead to next year is after the governor's election, regardless of outcome, what you continue to hear people talk about is since Washington had a capital bill, that flows to the state level and then from the state to the local municipalities and counties, that next year we pray that there's a capital bill and infrastructure related discussion coming out of Springfield. And so positioning for that has been a hot topic of our highway department, our investment in our roads and infrastructure. We cannot have the one discussion without obviously attempting to position long-term for what may or may not flow out of a discussion in Springfield. I did see a couple hands up. Mr. Webster, then Mr. Girl. Mr. Webster.
And first, thank you, Gene. I appreciate the update, the input. It was kind of timely with what we've been getting lately from UCCI. And I want to tell you this, that earlier this month, I asked for it, and Stacy responded, and she forwarded an email to all of us from UCCI, and it's their legislative tracking, what came out of the 100th General Assembly, out of their spring session. There's 12 pages here, 12 pages of information that says about House bills and the Senate bills. Now, this stuff should be forwarded to us. It comes to administration. This should be forwarded to us post haste. There's not a reason why we shouldn't all be sharing this. So Senate bills in here go from revenue tax, recording fees, compostable bags to things that will affect us. County Animal Fund, about how we collect and where we can put these funds. Agri-renewable energy facilities. These are all things that could possibly cost us some money, but they could benefit us there. There's one coming up here that's going to force us to spend some money by next year at this time, and that's for the courtrooms to provide lactation rooms for women who are nursing their babies. And so there's standards that we have to provide for that, private rooms with sinks and so forth. That's going to cost us some money. It's another unfunded mandate there. And I could go on and on. There's 12 pages of this in here, down to FOIA harassments. These are all things that came before the state in either the House or the Senate. Some got approved, some did not, some were there to languish. But now, the last one on there as well is very timely for us because it goes to the solar farm issue. So there's solar energy valuation. So this could change the amount of money that the county would indeed end up garnering in taxes. Now, this is very timely for us. There's also another bill that's on the governor's desk right now, I might tell you, that is expected to pass, brought in by the Department of Agriculture with work with the Farm Bureau and others. And there's going to be some definitions, some clear definitions about what the counties can and cannot do as far as solar farms. The beauty of that is it takes the responsibility off of our shoulders about dictating any more onerous mandates on these companies. So in other words, they're going to have to abide by state rules and regulations, and that takes it off of us. So that should expedite matters for these solar farms, which we're going to see a lot more of. There's a rush to do them within the next couple of years. Stevenson County right now has 22 of them in play because their way that they handle it in Stevenson County is much looser than the way we do in our county, and so they have very little restrictions on that. So that's what I got to say about that. So, but when you see this come from UCCI, please look at your emails. That's important stuff. That's the one we're paying $5,000 for a year or two, and we get, this week alone, I've got, I think, 2 more emails from them. Last week I got a couple of emails from them. So when you see that, open it up, read it. It's good info.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Good comments. And what I think with some of those items that are obviously being reported out at the end of session, we probably want to relook at what came out of that, what's in play, and then plan for next year as to what we want to attack when they go back into session. So very, very good comments. Mr. Girl.
Thank you, Chairman. Just real quick, I know we've talked about federal money and state money. Have we received any money as of today for battling the heroin opioid crisis? Have we received any money from the state of Illinois yet?
I think that would be, I'll follow up with Dr. Martell in terms of any particular funding that may be earmarked that would go her way. I couldn't speak to that right now, but a follow-up maybe.
That would go right through the health department, though. Would we know when that money was received or anything?
We can look at that and get that information out to you.
I just hope we're not waiting for the lawsuit to get finalized to actually battle this problem, so thank you.
Absolutely. More than one thing going on, right, in a community with a problem this big. Who else had their hand up? I think it was Mr. Wilson and Mr. Biondo.
Mine is quick. I would like for you to pass on to the rest of your crew that tomorrow is going to be a miserable day, that people should try to keep themselves hydrated.
Thank you. We can pass that on. Absolutely. Mr. Biondo.
Can you suggest what I can hydrate myself with? No, I have a question. You said something about the saving money by mailing out less assessments, only if the property changes in value. Is that just for the quadrennial year, or because that's usually the only year that they mail out every.
Correct.
You know.
Correct. And what we have to do is we have to pay for that space in the paper.
Right.
And so if someone's assessment has not changed, that property code would be omitted from that publication.
Okay, now, okay, so they would have to go to the website then to actually
Correct.
see what it is. Okay, one of the first things I did 9 years ago when I came here was the fact that in the quadrennial, I didn't get, a notice either. And sometimes, well, with the sales ratio and all that, it can change the rate still, so people can wind up, even if their property didn't change in value. We had like 20,000 assessment changes, but 70 or 80,000 people actually had increases in taxes. And so I wrote an article about it and said, well, 20,000 of you know your bill's going to go up. I'll tell you the other 80,000 is going to go up too. That's when properties were actually going up in value. So I just thought that's one piece that's going to, it might save them some money, but there's going to be a number of people who have tax increases and not know, because they don't know how to use the website or they don't have it available. Right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biondo. And thank you, Mrs. Crosby. Any other items?
No, sir.
Thank you very much. Any unfinished business? I do have a bit of new business. So next week, Wednesday is the 4th of July. Because of several board member conflicts with schedules as well as staff, there are not any scheduled meetings. For example, we are not having a finance meeting next week is one example, or operations or public safety or economic development or public works, I believe. Monday, July 9th, which is a board meeting week, Monday evening in lieu of caucus, we are going to have the finance and public safety meeting, and that's the one where we'll have some discussion of budget amendment and discussion with the sheriff and an update on progress as well as some budget amendment discussions. So we will get that out and remind people, but next week from a committee standpoint, we are off. That Monday, which is a board week, we will have a Monday finance public safety meeting, and then there will be other meetings as well that are being worked out. I talked to the two caucus chairs, and they will figure out when they want to have caucus that week, because that Thursday is a board meeting. And it's, again, we just ran into, we were worried about being able to have a quorum next Thursday, the day after the 4th of July. Any other comments or any follow-ups? Mr. Fellers?
Thank you. I just would encourage that we do have caucuses that week and we not bypass it.
It's a request to have caucus. I'm sure there will be, my understanding is that the caucus chairs were very interested in caucusing before the next board meeting. I do not want to speak for them, but that's the impression I was given strongly by Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Boomer. Mr. Earl, did you have a comment?
Yes, under new business, and this is something
We have Mr. Earl has the floor. Let's give him the floor, please.
I just want to kind of address the Illinois tumbleweed. If you don't know what that is, that's your plastic shopping bags that fly all over the place, ending up in trees, landfills, waterways, lakes, and rivers. I think it would be very astute and very wise of this board to think about the elimination of plastic shopping bags for retail use in this county. Mr. Webster just showed me that there's a Senate bill working on that right now. I would like the county to step up first and say, we don't want them here. I think everybody has paid attention to what's happening in our oceans and our waterways. We are slowly killing off the life, and because of plastics. So if we can go back to paper, that would be great. It's not going to happen overnight, but if you've ever been out to the landfill on a windy day, the ornaments are all over every tree within the miles that the truckers take to drop off the trash. It's just very, very bad for this community, the state, everybody. So it'd be nice if we could do something here in the following weeks, either get it to committee, see if we can pass some kind of resolution, see if the state's attorney can throw an opinion on exactly what we can do legality-wise. Thank you.
We'll definitely have follow-up on that. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Gurl. For those that don't know, in the meantime, most grocery stores and Target and Walmart all have recycling and return centers for those. So I know I, for one, collect about 1,000 of them over the 2-month period to make sure they all get back there so we can keep them out of the landfill. But thank you, Mr. Carl.
We'll come back to this item, I'm sure, in great detail in the coming weeks. May I please have a motion to go to closed session to talk with personnel? Oh, before we go, I'll withdraw that. We have a comment before we go to close, Mr. Webster.
Did we approve the minutes before we started this meeting?
Yes, sir.
Oh, did we? Okay.
Thank you. Glad you asked. Yep, got that clarified. May I please have a motion to go to closed session to discuss personnel? I got a motion by Mr. Wilson, a second by Mrs. Gorel. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? We'll go to closed in about 2 minutes for about 10 minutes. No action was taken in closed session. May I have a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mrs. Crosby, second by Mr. Fellers. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Happy 4th. God bless you. Thank you. Drink a lot of water.